What's up, everybody? It must be Tuesday. Happy Tuesday, Farron.
Is it really happy?
It is. It's happy. I'm happy to be here with you. It is because it's an all new episode of Beyond 2D right now with myself, one host, one part of the host picture here, Jessica Dugas, and my lovely co-host over here.
Farron Dozier. How everybody doing out there this afternoon, evening, depending on where you're located at?
Could be morning somewhere. Who knows?
It could be. Lucky you over there.
All right. Hello. We have been navigating the world of boundaries since last. We've been pushed recklessly down the rabbit hole of boundaries since last episode 2 weeks ago. Last time we talked about. We began uncovering some of the language and our meaning, our thoughts behind boundaries. I felt like we had a really good conversation, which started out with Farron, threatening to unfriend me during this process. And we're gonna find out. We still got two more episodes after. We got a minute.
Yeah, we got some time. Set some boundaries.
That's it. But today, we're discussing unveiling the language of or as navigating interpersonal boundaries. Excuse me, and we are, wanting to discuss what boundaries look like within relationships. And as we were talking about that, I was thinking about our good friend here on the Breakthrough Show Network, Lori Ann Davis, who a lot of you guys recognize that name from Project Joy, from the Breakthrough Show, from all of the other programs on the network. And I said I really wanted to get her perspective because she works with couples, she works with singles, and I wanted to get an expert that's like, okay, when it comes to boundaries, what do we need to be talking about here? So Farron and I sat down and had a conversation with Lori yesterday, which was a good one. Shall we play it for the people and then we'll come back?
We shall.
All right. So we're going to do that now. Here is our conversation with Lori, and we'll be back to discuss it afterwards. Here we go. Every show that we have at this point. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology from the University of West Florida. She was a licensed mental health counselor in Florida for over 20 years, practicing individual, marriage, and family therapy. She was a clinical supervisor for an outpatient office specializing in family therapy, and she is a relationship specialist, a member of the Relationship Coaching Institute, and she is also a matchmaker and coach with Talkify. So please welcome back to the Breakthrough Show Network, Ms. Lori Ann Davis.
It's been a while. It's nice to be back.
I know. It's been a minute. Lori was a co-host back on earlier seasons of the Breakthrough Show. So I mean, we've been connected for a long time. So I'm glad to have you back.
Okay.
But new to Farron.
Yes. Nice to meet you.
Love that. So we've been talking about boundaries. Last week on the show, we talked about just what it means, the definition of what we hear. I think part of what's really important about this conversation is what we each hear when we hear that word boundaries. So I'd love to just start out by asking you that, Lori, what comes to mind for you when you hear that word personally, and then also in the work you do in relationships?
So, I've logged in over 35 years at this point in dealing with people. And what I know is that it means something different to everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And what it means to them has to do with their own personal lens that they are viewing the world through. We all have had experiences in our lives, and those experiences create visions of how we see the world, how we see other people, how we respond to a word, what a word means to us, right? And so I think it can mean so many different things to so many different people that we can get in trouble sometimes because somebody has so when I hear boundaries, I can think for some people, boundaries are a way of they get really pissy, excuse my, you know, like around, I have to set my boundaries and my boundaries are firm and you don't cross those boundaries. And it's a way of pushing everybody away, trying to protect themselves, which probably came from a really needed space originally, right? They probably weren't protected and weren't protecting them and didn't know how to protect themselves. But they can really use that word boundaries. They think they're doing something good to push everybody away, and they don't understand why they don't have relationships that work. Other people can be like, no, I've learned how to take care of myself. And I know what I will allow and won't allow, right, in a relationship. Yes. You know, and because of that, I'm coming from a really good space and I want to create intimacy with another person and I want to let somebody in and I feel safe and comfortable with doing that in a way that works for me. You can see that those are really different, two different spaces to be in. One is kind of angry and aggressive, right? And another one is coming from confidence and wanting to make a connection and probably everything in between. So I think that's where it's a trigger word for a lot of people because it means so many different things.
Yeah. How do you begin to broach that difference as you're working with couples, like, or even individuals? Like, do you see that there's a difference right away in how each person interprets it, or is that something that like comes up later?
So, I mean, I'll use the word sometimes, but honestly, you know, like I have an issue with words because words can just and it seems like the further we go in society, the old, or maybe it's just me, maybe I'm getting to be an old fart.
No,
but the
not
older
just
I
you.
get, it seems like words are becoming more and more divisive. And that just really annoys me because my whole thing in my career and in my life is about trying to make connections with people. Like, how are we going to create a better world and better relationships? And how are we going to be happier if we can't connect with people? And so if you're assuming, right, that I mean something by a word that I didn't mean and you didn't bother to ask me, how are we going to make a connection? So for me, I think when I'm working with people, I'm listening to what they're saying. I'm not paying as attention so much to the words they're using. I'm listening to what's underneath. What are they saying? What are their pain points? And then how do we address that? And then I try to use words based on what I'm gathering from them. And if I have a question, because I work with clients across the board with so many different beliefs. So honestly, I've gotten to where now I just ask people, like, here's what I would use for this. Is it like, does that make any sense to you? Does that resonate with you? Does it offend you? What would you like me to say different? You know, and if they want a different word or something different, I'm like, all right, then let's use that one. Because it doesn't make a difference what the word is. It's like, where are you? Where do you want to be and what's getting in your way? And then that's what I'm going to work on.
You know, Lori, one of the things you said, a lens for myself was how I viewed myself too. Yes, we pay attention to how people view us, but really underneath it was how diminished I felt about myself, how disappointed, disconnected, how hurt, whatever those shames that I felt within myself, that had me more guarded, right? So then when people try to connect me or talk to me, and they might point out something that's true, and it's like, you shouldn't be saying that to me in my mind, like, but it's also hurtful. So that lens that we put on ourselves, for me, is why I was able to kind of disappear what I would say my boundaries were, because I get to be free to just be who I am and own my life experiences in my past. And then if I was dealing with those kind of things, I can only imagine what the next person is dealing with. So like you say, I ask more questions. I listen to the words, the tone, like what's underneath all of what they're saying. And if you really speak to that, those boundaries we say in language kind of disappear, and that person you experience that connection. So I definitely agree. But we how we look at ourselves too, for me, is really important on that part of the conversation.
Well, that's the start of it, right? It's all going to start with how you see yourself, because people, so for instance, I have worked with a lot of abused children, a lot of incest in my past career, I worked with women incest survivors. I've worked with people that have come out of some pretty horrendous circumstances. So, but it all starts with them, right? They have to feel like they're worth being treated different. They have to come up with their own self-worth, and that's where it has to start. And then from there, we can talk about, if you want to use the word boundaries, like we can then talk about, well, how do you allow people to treat you and to not treat you? But if you don't feel like you have the worth, and you don't see yourself as worthy of that, if you don't have a clear understanding of yourself, then that's got to be the first step. It has to start from there. And then we can learn how to do those sorts of things. Like, how do you take care of yourself and still make connections? And what you see frequently when people are first starting to take care of themselves is it can come across as pretty aggressive, or the boundaries can be walls that they build up, and those walls are really high. But that was better than not having any and getting beat up, emotionally, physically, whatever, right? So maybe that is a positive step at first. I think, again, we've got to just look at where somebody is. That might be the next step that they have to take. From there, then they can start to bring some of those down when they feel comfortable and safe, and say, okay, how do I feel safe? And now I want to connect with people, because otherwise I can just build these walls around myself and I'm going to be lonely, and I can't have a connection with anybody, right? But sometimes there's processes people have to go through, and everybody else is individual. They have to have their individual process around that.
Yeah, I love how you talk about the journey of, sometimes we do build that wall real high with bricks that aren't moving, and because that might be what's necessary in the moment. Like, Farron and I were talking before the first episode a couple weeks ago about when I left my ex, and that was a pretty high brick. It was a no, goodbye, done situation. And then slowly, like, letting people in again, and seeing what that was going to look like. But it really was kind of like a trial and error sort of thing for me. And now being in this space where it's like, I can go back and see all those times when I've created different types of boundaries, why I did that, and how every single one was created with love for some kind of reason. And it was going back to what you guys were both talking about, which was learning to love myself ultimately at the start of everything.
Yeah. And also, do you see people ultimately? It's how you see others too. And which, again, Farron's going to say, it also has to depend on how you see yourself, right? But how do you see others? Do you see other people as, excuse me, as ultimately good and wanting to make this connection? Or do you see everybody as out to hurt you, right? So there may be some healing that needs to be done with the individual person, because if we can't see that people that we're capable of connecting, maybe there is good in everybody. Some people, we're not going to want to make a connection with them. That's okay, right? But unless we see people as viable for connecting with, and we have a desire to want to connect with them, we're not going to go out and try to figure out. It's complicated sometimes, the communication with people. It can be hurtful. It can be complicated. It's, one day it's good and next day it's not. And, it's not an easy thing. But if that's our desire to connect with others in some level, then we're going to work on that. And that's going to be a priority for us. And my guess is, Farron, that is for you, from what I've heard you say. And so you go out trying to make those connections.
Yeah. And one of the things you said earlier as well for me is important is, the power of our language, the power of words and the meaning. And for myself, again, I had to learn how exaggerated I talked. I had to learn what words that I used that didn't give me power anymore. And being able to take those principles and find new words and look in the dictionary and not just describe life anymore, but to say, like, this is what's so with me, and if I'm hurting or disappointed, like, find the word that I feel that best matches that feeling and say that, then say, instead of saying I'm struggling or I got issues, because we all feel that, we all have that. But then what does that mean to you and mean to me? We can agree on that, but then it's a description. And I believe that sometimes the words that we use is our own trap. And then it doesn't allow us to be free to even hear somebody else, because if you say you're struggling, then I'm looking in my life like, oh yeah, I'm struggling. And then it's like, it could go either direction. It could be a connection, or it could be a debate on what we're struggling about.
And if it's a connection, is it a connection that's uplifting you or bringing you both down, right? It's like, that's when people can get so stuck in their stories. No, I love that. Like, really taking some time to figure out, what is it for me? So many times when people are angry, we know that, like, anger is just the top of the list. Like, dig deeper, go down. It's, usually it's not anger. Usually there's something else under there. So if we can take the time to go underneath and figure out what that is, that's one of the things I tell people in relationships, that when you're angry with somebody, go take some time away first and figure out what's really being triggered for you. Because chances are it's not what you think it is. Now, if somebody's yelling and screaming obscenities at you, well, maybe that is what it is, right? But so many times it's something subtle, it's something small, and the other person may not even realize it. I've had people get mad at me and unfriend me, and I didn't know why. And sometimes I would eventually find out, and I'd be like, wow, I couldn't have even dreamed that. Like, I didn't even dream that, much less mean it. Like, I would never. But they made that assumption, went their own separate ways, right? So we've got to come up with, what is it for us? Because then when you know what it is for you, a lot of times, honestly, it's your thing, and you go work it out, and you don't even need to maybe come back to the other person. But if you do, then, like you said, you're coming back to the other person, expressing what's really going on with you. And then maybe if you're in any kind of relationship with them, if you can express that, it helps them to not feel defensive, and to be able to meet you there and say, oh, wow, okay, that I hear that's what's going on for you. Like, now we can talk about what could we do together to support each other through this. But that's not how most conversations go, honestly. But.
I mean, it's interesting, because if you even look at the interactions that Farron and I have had about this topic of boundaries, going back to the initial reaction that Farron had, I keep asking about, because for me, in my head, I'm going, okay, if you don't like the word boundaries, if that's not a word that you're choosing to use and where you're at in your life, I get that. But I'm over here going, what word would you like me to use? How would you like me to describe it? Because in my head, I'm going, okay, not wanting to use the word boundaries is a boundary. I'm trying to figure it out, but I'm like, how would you describe it? How would you suggest, like, couples get on that same page, or even friends or business people, like, anybody that is in a relationship of some kind? How do you suggest people get on that same page about trying to figure out the language that's being used, and maybe even just learning to listen? How do we listen a little better?
Yeah. So, I mean, we can take responsibility ourselves, because that's all we can do, right? We can't control what the other person does, but we can take responsibility for doing exactly what we talked about, for figuring out, I love it, Farron, what is really going on with you? How are you really feeling? So that then when you go to have a conversation with that person, what normally happens is we put up these roadblocks. We put up roadblocks because we say, you did this, you made me, you always, like, there's so many things, like, we're presenting it in a way that the other person is difficult for the other person to hear. So when we take responsibility and say, I'd like to share something that's going on with me, and we take responsibility for our feelings, our needs, what's going on for us. Now, that doesn't mean if we're in a relationship with somebody, there might not be some things we have to work out around that, right? But if we started off with taking responsibility ourselves and coming at it with, I want to share this with you because we're partners, we're a team, and even if it's just friendship, right? Like, I want to share this with you then the person is much more likely to go, yeah, I want to hear what's going on with you, if they care about you. And you're going to find out if they're going to care about you. If that's how you approach it and they shut you down and don't want to hear it, then you've got some other things to think about. But that's the first step, right? Is not blaming them, not saying, well, you did this, and not being angry with them about it, coming from a calm, neutral place, talking about what's so for you, taking responsibility for it is the beginning of all of it. It has to come from that. You know, I really try to be fairly evolved here, but I can tell you, if somebody comes at me angry or blaming me, like, my stomach hurts. I shut down. It's bringing up painful childhood experiences for me. And I'm still gonna try, but it's gonna be really hard for me to hear you and want to work with you if that's what you're doing. Because now, instead of coming from the front, this part of my brain, which is logical and thinking, I'm now coming from this reptilian part of my brain.
Survival.
And I'm in protective mode and survival mode, right? That, and we also expect, I think it's like, we also have to talk about expectations. Do we expect, well, that upsets me, so you need to change? Like, really? I mean, come on.
I don't hear you once that's said. Nope.
You know, Lori, the thing back to words is power is I kind of share with people that are willing to listen, right? Because you have to sometimes ask permission to speak into people's lives, right? Because they're so guarded and defensive. So, but I ask questions like, can you look out your window and show me that barrier in your mind? Like, and you can't see it in nature. So I've even learned with myself, with my languages, to compare my language and my thoughts up against nature. Because if I can see it in nature, then it's there. But if it's in my head, then I know it's coming from those past experiences, those survivals and things like that, and protecting myself. And so it's like, you can have barriers in your mind, but you're still protecting to me, it's still a protective mechanism to have that barrier. And for some people, it's empowering. Like I heard with Jessica, like, man, she uses that barrier to encourage to come from confidence, right? So I could see how it could work in that particular way. But for me, it's still a little bit of protection in there somewhere that we're guarded to try to keep preventing from us feeling some type of way, or even me going off on you. Because if you say something, I might be the one so I need that barrier not just for you, for myself, to not go to jail or to whatever. So it's like, but when I learned to take responsibility in my integrity and honor my word, like the experience of life shifted for me, transformation, being delivered, like all of that, it like disappeared. And all the stuff that I thought were barriers and how I talked and all the childhood traumas, I could say that I took responsibility 100%, because a lot of that was my truth, but it wasn't the truth. And by asking more questions, I heal with my parents. I heal with a lot of those childhood traumas, because I saw my mind like, oh, that was true for me, but what was it for that other person? And let me go find out for and then when I found out for the other person, it was like a whole different story. It was like, well, then I've been protecting myself, and they don't even remember the story. And it's like, okay, so then I was willing to let my story go and be okay and own it as a corrupted kind of view. But then, so now where am I today with you? And then asking for forgiveness, and asking not just apologize, but forgiveness, and really wanting to connect. And some people were like, oh, I forgive you, but don't call me no more. And then I have friends say, oh, I forgive you, let's work it out. But it was like, it was really all me. And like 99.9% of the stuff that I had carried for those first 4 years of my life, I saw really was Farron made those up, and I could take responsibility for making it up, because it just wasn't the truth.
Right. So what if you run into somebody that, I love all of that, right? And making it up. Sometimes it's just when you're a child, you can't make sense of it, and it's the only way you can make sense of it, because developmentally you can't, right? So you didn't really make it up. It's just now you have to look at it as an adult and go, oh, now it's different now. But what if you run into somebody that you can do all of that, right? You can speak your truth, you can choose your words, but the response you get back from them is abusive in some way. How do you handle that?
You know, I still do my best to listen because, you know, I know that we're all dealing with something. But if it's at the point where it's still like, you know, my last marriage, like I was like, you know what? I need to complete this because I just can't be in this relationship that's gonna have me always asking for forgiveness, always apologize. Like you can't look in like one view to look about yourself, then I just don't want to be in that kind of relationship. And so I completed it for my own healing and for my own life journey to continue what was because it was still me, but it was like I still needed to figure out what was going on inside myself. So I just couldn't be in a relationship like that. So I chose to complete it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're still friends. We're even better friends, but I have the space to be Farron without the criticizing or whatever that was for that person of the reactions of my behavior. And you can't control that with how people see you. So that's my view on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting.
And
It's
so-
interesting just to hear the you know, just different experiences that we go through, I think shape so much of how we think about boundaries and things like that as well. Go ahead, Lori.
No, I was just going to say, and he set a boundary, right? But the other, so I was joking. But the other part about words too, that I think we have to, going back a little bit to the beginning about words, is that sometimes too, we also want to use words that people understand what they are. So sometimes we might label something as an overview, and we know that it's so nuanced that one word just doesn't cover it, right? And we're like, it just doesn't make sense. But again, if we're going to, you know, if I'm writing a book, you know, I have to have a title to the chapter, right? I have to have, you know, so, and I want people to see that and they go, oh, I have some idea of what that is. So now maybe I want to learn more about that. So I think sometimes we also have to use labels, even if we don't like them, that the majority of people have some understanding what that's like, just so that we can start a conversation. Once we start the conversation, then we can get into the nuances and then we can drop the label maybe. But sometimes we do have to do that in our world.
Right. I think that's what, even when we were talking about Farron coming up with this topic, and at first we said boundaries, and I'm like, I don't know if we can really break that up into 4 different weeks, but we can, because that boundaries is such a broad label that it's like it's so nuanced, and there's so many they're healthy boundaries. There are boundaries that are maybe not too healthy. There are all of these different things that we can address. So sometimes I love what you said, Lori, about just sometimes using a word to get through that boundary, that barrier that they have up, and then going, okay, now we can explore because we've met somewhere where we have an understanding, right?
Yep. I had a coach one time that I was doing some training with, and you couldn't use the word healthy. Like that word was like off the table. You couldn't use it. It was a huge trigger. And I'm like, okay, but it's out there in the world so much that it's like so difficult to never use the word. So I don't know. We just all have our own, we all have our own things, and that's okay. So yeah.
And that's the same with me. Like I said, once I learned the words that didn't give me my own power, like give me power, like vulnerable, busy. Like I removed the word busy because it just made me, my experience of myself was like I didn't have time for nothing, and that overwhelming came experience. So to me, it's the experience of the word also, right? And so I say that I'm up to things, so I can always make time, right? And I've created ways to create time, even if I think I have a busy schedule and you want to have a meeting with me, I'll negotiate a time that I have available. I ask them, what time do you have? So it takes away that experience of being busy to just being up to stuff in life. And then I'm not in my own space, dealing with that overwhelming, and then nothing gets done. So the power of those words for us as an individual, like you said, I believe it's most important for us to establish what that is for me. And yes, people use the word busy all the time. And I when I go in my head, I'm like, oh, I'll ask more questions. Like, what is that? what does that look like? Because people say, I got to go to the grocery. What are you doing today? I'm busy. What do you got to do? I got to go to the grocery store, car wash. That's like 3 hours worth of work. Like, what's the rest of the day? It's like,
we agree on the word busy, Farron, by the way. I don't care
Oh,
much
okay.
for that word either.
So
Oh,
it's like,
100%, 100%. So for me, sometimes I know what I do with myself, and I'm laughing as you say that because I've done that. Good. Oh my gosh, my schedule, like I'm so busy, and then I'm exhausted, and I'm like, wait a minute. You know, I'm like, really? So for me, it's when I notice when I say things, and this is what I try to teach my clients too. A lot of times when you say something, like, how do you feel? You know, like tap into your feeling. I think that's what you're saying. So if you say something and you feel, if you say I'm busy and that's, you like being busy and that works for you, then by all means use the word. For me, I'm like you. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, like I can be exhausted just waking up in the morning thinking I'm busy. So then I have to stop and go, so if I don't feel good, what am I saying to myself? And how can I shift that around to saying, oh my gosh, look at all of the people I get to help today. Look at, right? You know, and I still have this time and I can do this and I can, you know, like what else do I want to do and how do I fit it in? And now the day's been beautiful. Or I can say, I'm so grateful that I have all the energy I need, right? To do all of these things when I open up my calendar that are there. And how nice is that? And how grateful I am to my body that it's, you know, so I mean, we can shift those things. And I think if more people would learn to do those things, people would be happier. So I think it goes back again. We're going right around back to no matter what's going on, look at yourself. Like, how does it resonate with you? What's going on? And words are so powerful, so powerful.
I did that with LA traffic. When I first took landmark education, that was one of the things is driving in LA. And when I transformed and I viewed LA traffic as beautiful people in their great cars, you know, driving to work or taking care of their family, like it gave me another like aliveness, right? And that if I'm in traffic, did I leave in enough time? Did I leave? Was I rushing? Did I leave? Like, did I give myself 2 hours, you know, to take this journey that may take, you know, an hour? But I'm, you know, so it's all back on me of my experience. But then when traffic happens, I get a say in if I'm going to let that anxiety come over me and be frustrated, or am I going to be like, man, I wonder where they're going? Like, you know, who knows what they're in an emergency for or whatever. Like, so for me, that's we focus so much on the activity of life that we forget about the experience of it. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to do this show, because I wanted to show that there is an experience of life that's just as important as the stuff that we're doing. And you can do that work frustrated, upset, or you can do that work at peace, calm, joy, fun. And we have control over. But most people think that we're at the effects of that activity, and then we're stuck, and then your relationships falter or they get thwarted but it's not even about you. It's really me surviving in my mind. And if you don't have the courage to say that to your partner, then you walk away with that destroyed relationship. And then you walk away with, man, you messed up again, Farron, like again, like, and then you deal with all that extra stuff that comes with that. So it's like, this is why we're here, because I felt like we could contribute this if we willing to tell the truth of where I'm at. Like I use my life in here, so to tell the truth and what I've discovered for myself, maybe that person listening can just lean to the side in their own life and be like, oh, that's what that is. Yeah, that's your version of that. And now you can take a look if you're willing to look at that. Or we want to be stuck and we get to be righteous and right. And then there's no, to me, when you're right and you invalidate people, there's no love present. Like, we want the presence of love, and me being right about it all the time and invalidating the other person's experience, there's no love in that. There's no experience of love in there. There's a different experience. So
there's no room for it.
Yeah, that's why we're beyond 2D.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And how many expectations do we have, right? Like, are we waiting to be happy? Are we are we blaming our partner for the things that they do or don't do for our unhappiness? Are we blaming the traffic? you know, for our being late or for our being unhappy? Are we waiting until the right partner comes along? Because I work with singles too, right? The right partner to come along, the right job to come along, the right money to come along, the kids do get to a certain age. I mean, like all of these things we can be waiting on. And it's like, what if tomorrow doesn't come? You wasted, like, do you want to waste today? Or are there things about right now that you could be happy with? You know, what is it that you do like about your partner? What are they adding to your life? And if it's nothing, well, then maybe it's time to make a different choice, right? Maybe it's time to end that chapter and move on and create a different life for yourself.
Right.
If you're stuck in traffic, right? Like my thinking is, wow, I'm alone. If you're a mom, you know, like you're never alone. Like, I'm alone in the car and I use the music and I'm jamming and I'm singing and I don't care what the people think that are driving past me. Like, what? This is good, you know? So, but we do have to remind ourselves of all of those things, right? We've got to remind ourselves I think people get annoyed with me sometimes, especially in couples counseling, when I'm telling people you're responsible for your own happiness. Now, I'm not saying I don't want you to negotiate on things and work together as a team, but I'm saying, first of all, you're responsible for your own happiness. Yeah. And my first thing that I try to get all couples to do is to create some happy experiences together. And they're like, yeah, but they're doing this. And I'm like, I know. And we're going to address all of those things. Now, what can you do to have fun together? How can you start to build some positives in there? Yeah. Because you need that if you're going to try to make a connection. Are you going to try to find if that love's still there? You have to have some positives. You can't just sit. So, by the way, I don't do a lot of couples counseling anymore because I kind of got in my office and all they wanted to do was somebody else to validate their point of view. Yep. Right. And so if that's how people came to me, I don't work with them. I would rather work with individuals and try to help them get into a good space, that they're in a good space to create good relationships, right? Mm-hmm. Unless two people are coming and they're both in that space. But
shoot down those boundaries.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the singles part, Lori, because I know you're doing the matchmaking now and the coaching and everything. And I know that sometimes people that are single that are looking actively for a partner will have that list, that long list of what they will and won't accept. They've got some serious boundaries going on, and maybe it might take them a little bit longer to check off every single box on that list. So you talked a little bit about where couples are concerned, negotiation being important and meeting in the middle and all of that. But if we've got all of these walls and all of these boxes to check and all of that before we even get into a relationship, then to me that can hold us. I feel like it holds us back a little bit. Can you speak to that for a moment, Lori?
Yeah, 100%. The first thing I try to get singles to do is take that list and shred it and say, now let's start over. Right? Like when I used to do workshops in person all the time, I'd make people write down their list, right? And they'd be all excited. Oh yeah, I've got this list, right? And they're all excited. They think they're doing something good and they're writing. And then I say to them, all right, now tear it into a whole bunch of pieces. And I'd pass around a trash can and make them put it in the trash can. I'd say, that's why you're single. Now, do you really want to be in a relationship? Right?
Oh, Farron shocked.
I had a day with them. I had a weekend with them, right? You know, and we didn't. It wasn't the first thing we did. Don't worry. It wasn't the first thing we did. We built up to that, right? But then we would talk about, now let's talk about dating in a way that really works, because that doesn't work, right? Are you frustrated and single? You're frustrated and single because you're dating the way society tells you to date. 100% understand it, and it doesn't work. So then we would come up with, let's talk about some core values. Let's talk about a handful, like no more than a handful of some core values, some lifestyles that really are very important to you, that you want to share with an individual. And when we've thrown out all of the other stuff, and now we were looking for somebody with those core values, now we can find somebody that has a good, solid, my dad was a home builder. So I think about it as in those terms. Now we have the foundation to a relationship. If the foundation is solid, now we can build a relationship on that. The foundation's not solid. We find somebody that we think has this checklist of stuff. When we get down the road, we didn't have those core values that match. No matter how beautiful what you built on the top of that foundation was, it's going to crumble. And so usually by the time I've worked up to this point, people get it, right? They're like, oh yeah, I get it. There are going to be some people that still want to date based on those long lists, and they have every right to do that. Chances are they're going to stay single, or they're going to end up in relationships that don't work, right? We really need to come back to what's the core values, and then who knows who you might find. It really expands the people you can meet, and it helps you to understand, do I keep moving forward getting to know this person more? In terms of a relationship, we might decide they're friends, we might decide, but we now know, okay, well, I don't know about all of these. So maybe I need to give this person some more dates. Maybe I need to keep learning more about them. And now we're open and we're curious. Or if we learn, one of these core values just isn't met. We just don't see eye to eye on that. And we aren't going to. So they can be a wonderful person, but they're probably not going to be a good partner, long-term partner for me, right? So we go our separate ways without being angry, without feeling rejected. Like, it's just a whole different way. It's the Relationship Coaching Institute. They call it conscious dating. And it works. I mean, I came out of a 28-year relationship, married to my soulmate for so long, right? And had to start over. And it's how I found my husband. Like, we're almost 12 years now together. Not somebody, if you had described him, that I ever thought I would have dated or married. But the core values were there, right? And so I got to know him. And almost 12 years later, I just keep discovering layer and layer and layer and more layers about what a great choice it was. But if I hadn't dated based on those core values, and so I like to share that own personal experience, I would have probably not responded when he reached out to me. I would have gone, you're not my type.
It sounds like... Right. It sounds like great things to keep in mind no matter what relationship you're going to go into, whether it's a friendship or a business relationship or anything, to have those few core values, but then keep your mind open, because you never know what somebody's going to bring to your life. And that's why when we were joking last week about, are we still going to be friends after this series? Like, there are so many things that I love about Farron that it's like, one use of a word, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. And that whole relationship piece for me, after discovering like 10 or 11 decisions, right, from 2 years old to 50, just finally having the self-love and the self-esteem back at this age at 53, and then now filtering my life through the biblical principles, the kingdom principles. Now I get to see what those principles have to say about life. And I've got more freedom, because when I compare like my hope in God and my hope in the world, and then my hope in Farron, it was like Farron's hope and the world's hope was kind of corrupted as who I want to be today. But I looked at what the kingdom principles said, and I'm like, hey, I like those. Let's go see what that provides for us. And it's giving me, experience being whole and complete. Some things I got delivered from, some things I got a better understanding from. So having those principles for me is what I live by them. Like, I'm used by them. Like, sometimes people think principles are conceptual and they sound good for you, but not for me. But if you're used by that, man, that's where transformation in life shows up differently on the other side of being used by that principle. So I'm all principles now. I've found 3 principles that I use, but I filter all those 2 up against that third one, which is the biblical principles. And I'm at peace with myself. Like, I'm finally at, like, I'm good. I can listen to people and all that. So to see if I'm going to find that next relationship is what I'm doing now, is like, what are all those core principles that I'm looking for, right? That are going to match up with those beliefs and those principles, and maybe the person will be a good friend, and maybe they would, become that long life partner. But it's not from what I used to live from, so it's like a different experience for me today. So I'm at peace with it.
I love it.
And single is not just a status. It's most, but we look at that label and it's like, oh, the world says about singles. It's like, man, that's the best. You have no idea how that's the best status to have, because you can do what you want. You could leave the toilet seat up. You can take the toothpaste cap off. You can walk around with your shoes up. Like, That's the best. But would I want to date somebody who does that? Maybe not. Maybe not. So then now I gotta self-reflect and be like, well, what is, what am I really looking for? But right now I'm on a spiritual journey, and I'm at peace with that stuff. So
Right. And wherever you want to be, right? I mean, I think that's the other thing. Some, singles sometimes feel like, well, it's not okay if I'm single. Well, it is okay if you're single, right? It's all what you want and what you desire. That should be the guiding course. And then you said something else too, Farron, that I think is really important for singles is we can have these values that we're looking for in a partner, right? And in a partnership, are we also showing up as consistently as we can? We're human, we're not perfect,
right.
But are we trying to show up to the best of our ability with those same principles? And so that, for me, that's what you brought up, was another really wonderful point, that we have to also then take a look at it, because sometimes I'll see singles talk about, oh, I want this and I want this and I want this in a partner. And then I look at their behavior and I'm like, ooh, okay. So were we showing up that way? Like they're not sometimes. And it's like, so you're not going to attract what you're looking for because is the person that you want to attract, are they going to also be attracted to you? And I don't mean physically, right? Like I'm talking about values here, so we have to make sure we got to look at our own stuff and say, am I doing my best to show up according to those same principles?
So I use that example when I share with people about principles. Is like loyalty. Like people say, I want loyalty. But for me, a person who's saying that they want loyalty, either maybe holding back their loyalty because they want to see it from you first. So they're not even giving that because they want to see if they could trust you with loyalty. Then they'll give their loyalty, but they're screaming they want loyalty. But then your behavior doesn't even show that as well. So it's like, in my listening, it's like, if you're looking for loyalty, I got some questions about that, because it sounds like you may have been hurt by something or you're dealing with something, and you want people to see that you want that from someone first. But then if you're both dealing with that, then nobody's going to give the loyalty, because it's like, and then now you could be the perfect person, but the boundaries or the holding back or the resisting of those emotions or whatever that is for you, you can't even be free to be loyal. But what does that mean? Like, what does that look like? I ask a question like, well, what does it look like?
Yeah.
Like, so you have to ask more. Like I said, I'm learning. I teach my daughters. You have to ask more questions. You have to ask before you make it mean something about you personally. You have to ask that person more question, because they could be reflecting, like bullies. They could be deflecting that stuff off of you, off from them, up to you, and then you're over here suffering because it's also feeding the monster in you of how you feel about yourself diminished. So it's just so many levels to that.
There's a lot of big words that we've been throwing around.
Yeah, it's a
Your
lot
loyalty and all of that. There's some big, because they're so multi-layered, right?
Yeah, they're labels. They're
yeah.
labels. Loyalty is a label. What do you like? What does that look like for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I like walks in the park I want walks in. I'm like, walk in the park every day. Like, is that every day, or is that like twice a week? It's like, what do you mean by I love walks in the park? Because for me, it's not realistic to go walk in the park every day. Like, I don't know about every day, right? But if you don't ask those questions, the expectation is, oh, you're not doing this, and you can never do it enough, because they never actually said, oh, okay, twice a week is cool. Okay, cool. I can live with that. We can negotiate that. But
see, now when I said I love walks on the beach, I meant it, and my husband just moved me back here because he knows I meant it. Okay.
You might like walks on the beach by yourself. That's easy.
I'm not. I didn't have to specify that. He just made sure I got to the beach. That's the important thing. Lori, do you have any final thoughts about boundaries and relationships you like to leave the audience with today?
Just something really simple. And Farron just said it. Ask questions. Like, don't make assumptions, right? Like, ask questions, more communication, more of a desire to actually connect with somebody on some sort of level. And you're not going to know where that level can go unless you talk to them and you ask questions. So try the best people can to drop assumptions and ask questions and find out. You might ask questions and find out your assumption was correct and go, oh, okay. Glad I know that. But you're not going to know for sure unless you are just open enough to ask questions and see where those connections can go.
I love that. Obviously, we know that everybody can connect with you at LoriAnnDavis.com. Is there anywhere else you would like to direct our audience to today, Lori?
You can, I've got Facebook stuff, but you can find all of that stuff on there on my website.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lori. It's so good to see your face back on the Breakthrough Show Network. We love to see you here, and I hope we won't go this long in between seeing you again.
Thank you so much. Nice meeting you. Thank you. Hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm blessed, my brother. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Hey, did you see the game last night?
Oh, that was a good game.
But did you see the shot?
I lost money from that shot.
Oh, man, that shot was cold,
I
man.
hated it, but it was good. Damn. What's in those jeans?
You really want to know?
I do.
Exhaustion, muscle spasms, asthmatic issues, unexpected sickle cell trait crises.
Damn. Are you serious? When I was young, I found out I had sickle cell trait. My mom's told me, but I ain't have no knowledge of it. But when I got older, I had a child, and the doctor told me my daughter has sickle cell trait. Do you know the fact that both parents have sickle cell trait? There's a 50% chance the child may have the trait, and 25% chance the child may have the disease.
Hey, that's what's the count. Do you know that 2.5 million people in the United States have sickle cell trait, 300 million people globally? I didn't find out I had sickle cell trait until I was in the Army, 10 years. Next thing you know, I had a sickle cell trait exertion site.
Sickle cell? I thought that was a black gene or something.
Nah, man, the Latin community is number 2. 1 out of 36,000 babies are being born with sickle cell disease. You could be Caucasian, Mediterranean, European. You gotta know your bloodline, man.
There is an inherited gene in our community that has been forgotten. The name is sickle cell trait. WDCONSCT, also known as What's the Count, is out to bring awareness, education, and prevention to people all over the globe. Want more information? Call us now at 323-215-5384 or visit www.wdconsct.org.
Welcome back to Beyond 2D with your host, Jessica and Farron. And special thank you to Lori Ann Davis for participating with us in that conversation yesterday. It was so good. Please be sure to visit her at LoriAnnDavis.com. We appreciate you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, okay, good. Whew.
I'm so glad that we were able to have that conversation. There were so many really good moments, and going back to a lot of things we've talked about, communication and trust, and our values and things like that. Like, we've talked about all of that stuff, and I want to give a huge thank you to everybody that's been commenting throughout that conversation as well. Obviously, that part of the conversation with Lori was recorded yesterday, so I couldn't address you as we were going on, but I really appreciate you guys sharing, because it is a really vulnerable topic, right, Farron?
Very, very, very. And she hit so many key points that I had to go back and sit down with myself and like, okay, man, you've heard it from another perspective, a source that Jessica trusts. So can I trust her insight? And so I did. I self-examined, and I actually came up, because you asked me, well, what word, what word, right? And so I could honestly say that what I've been practicing since I've, kind of disappeared that word from boundaries to agreements, right? And so
I like that.
To have agreement and it's negotiation, it's that communication piece, right?
It's
so it's
the
like,
communicate, exactly.
right.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, if I sit down with you and we have a conversation and I put aside my views to hear what's up with your views, right? And then I can look at myself and be like, I can relate to you and why you would feel that way about whatever we're talking about. Then if there's a space where I feel like this is something that I'm interested in, but I'm not ready for it, let's create some agreements. Let's negotiate this process. Like I said, how many walks in the park do you want a week, right? and the agreement is the agreements that we come up with could be a boundary, right? Because now we get to practice. There's space for us to mess up. There's space for us to grow. There's space for us to communicate. Hey, you know what? We only did one walk in the park. Like, what's going on? You know what? And then it's back on me because now I'm going to agree. I'm also in that negotiation of that agreement. Or what are the consequences? Right. So then if we agree to the negotiation and the agreements and the consequences, then you have a right to come back and say, hey, you said you was going to do A, B, C, and D, and you didn't do that. What's going on with you? Oh, you know what? I actually kind of felt, a lack of confidence or courage or whatever that was. And so now it's back to communication. It's not a boundary where it's just one-sided. And so that's how I've been for the last 13 years, is creating those opportunities to have a conversation. And is it in my core principles that she brought up, is the core principle like a definite disqualified conversation completely, like non-negotiable? Or am I willing to negotiate even a core value? Because maybe we both can grow in that core value. Maybe that core value is there for both of us. And maybe you lack a sense of confidence or courage to be that core value or express it. So then if I'm listening to you, I could see that or hear that. And then maybe it's willing to negotiate. But I think if we both come up with the consequences as an agreement, then you're not going to be surprised, if I come back to you and say, hey, this is what it is. This is not working. Can we create some workability in this? Or is this enough for us to say, you know what? We're probably better as friends, right? And let's just leave it at that, because we could still work together and we could still have a conversation or relationship. But as my core value, as my core principle, if you're not willing to negotiate that piece with me, then for me, it's a right. And so there's no real boundary, for me, it's like we have agreements and we have consequences, and it's all, at the end of the day, it's all in language and it's all negotiable. It's all negotiable. So that's my word for boundary. Give me my power is agreements. So
I can see for sure how agreement and even negotiation could be very they're softer words. They're softer words for sure, because there's not that hard stop there. I think some of the times in my life I can look back and see where a firm boundary, where communication, negotiation, agreement wasn't possible in those situations, where there's some where it's like, okay, no, that boundary needed to happen, that hard stop needed to happen the way that it did, and sometimes we have to understand that when that happens, so whether we are choosing to communicate, negotiate, firm boundary, no communication, no matter what we choose to do in any given circumstance, we have to understand that sometimes there's going to be consequences for that, in the form of extra healing that needs to happen, more time to get through things, and I think part of my challenge with, because as I was looking at some of the comments and stuff that were coming through this episode as well, sometimes when we go to communicate our boundaries, and Lori addressed this too, we can come off as like, this is it, that's the end of the story. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we do have to understand how that can come off. And the consequences sometimes of that is that's going to create that energetic hard stop for people, where they're going to go, whoa, like that's not like, and make them like scared to mess up, like scared to be human, and so it's such a, Lori really said it when she used the word nuanced. It's such a, layered, nuanced conversation to have, because we do all process things in such different ways. But I think for me, with, navigating interpersonal boundaries, which is what this episode is called, it goes back to the importance of communication, but also what we are communicating by setting boundaries. What are those consequences of when we set them? And I think we're going to get into that in the next couple of weeks as well.
And at the end of the day, you might be good with that consequence, even if it's a negative one, right? You might be, you know what, if that's going to be the consequence in that one area. So am I going to focus on the 5% that doesn't work or the 95% that works, right?
Right.
So we just have to understand that if this happens, how do we handle that? Because I don't like that, and I'm not for that. So I've heard people say, you know what, if my partner cheated on me, I might not leave, right? Because they have the capacity of handling, those kind of conversations. So lastly, you might be okay with that consequence, but you won't know unless you're willing to hear that other person's side before you set that, disqualifier up there. I did it before when I was younger. The girl smoked cigarettes, and that was my number one DQ. But she was so fine, I let the cigarette go. I was like, but she ended up stopped smoking. But I was like, but that had been my DQ from a long time. But she was so beautiful. I was like, I'll let that cigarette smoker go. We negotiated that. She stopped smoking. But it's like that's that's what it looks like. You might be okay with that consequence, and the relationship can be fine.
Yeah.
But it takes that level of communication, the workability. Integrity creates a space for workability, right? Because you're doing what you said, you're being honest, you're open, you're talking, you're communicating, and you're negotiating, and it's possible.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think we're gonna have a good conversation next episode as well. We're gonna have one or two guests on next episode too, as we talk about boundaries where cultures are concerned. I think it's gonna be a really good conversation. I feel like we're only gonna scratch the very surface in an hour of that conversation because we get into a lot of history where that's concerned. And so we're gonna have people from different places, cultures, different things like that. But I think even some of that, as you were talking, I was thinking too about I was watching a matchmaker show that was all Indian singles, and there was one there was a girl single who was like so used to seeing her father like super devout and praying several times a day. Oh no, this wasn't the Indian one. I think this was the Jewish matchmaking. Anyway, I watched so many of them damn shows. I don't know what's what. So anyway, my point being is that she was so used to seeing her parent being so devout and praying several times a day and really strict religiously, and she wanted that in a husband. And the husband that the matchmaker, the partner that the matchmaker brought her, the potential husband, was only praying like 4 times a day instead of 6, and she was like, no, can't do it. Can't do it. Like, didn't even give him a chance to like work up to that 6 times a day. But it was a hard stop for her. She's like, no, I want someone even further in their faith journey than I'm at. Like, she's like, I want a husband that I can like follow them spiritually, whatever. So it was interesting to see, because I had to honestly respect both sides of the situation there, where I get where she was coming from, but I also understand him of going like, I'm just trying, like, give me a chance to pray 2 more times.
and that'll be another conversation we have in another word, because for me, what I would go to is the standard that her father set so high. No man is going to live up to that, right? So now she's gauging her views off of her father. Yeah, she would have to, like you say, cultivate that next man. That, hey, if he's doing 4 times, can we practice 6 and you work that? But if that's as parents, sometimes we do that to our children so much that I don't want to say idolize us, but we set that bar so high in their mind that no man's who's gonna live up to that like automatically. Like, that's where those negotiations, all the all that stuff comes in. So that's good.
we're gonna have some good conversations. Obviously, like I said, next episode we're gonna be talking about cultures and boundaries and those things tied together. And then the final week we're gonna be talking about sometimes we set boundaries for ourselves that stop us from achieving our goals, stop us from moving forward. And what happens when those boundaries we set don't work out, especially for ourselves. So we're gonna be talking about that final episode, because I think it's a good thing to end on, because going forward, you know, we wanna keep that forward motion. We don't want to hold ourselves back, whether it's in relationships or with ourselves. So
For sure.
thank you for this lovely conversation again tonight.
We made it.
We did it. It's happening. I want to thank all of you so much for participating in the conversation, and those of you that are going to be there on the replay, I appreciate you as well. Continue to give us your thoughts on boundaries as we talk about them. We appreciate it, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Peace.
2 weeks. See you later.
Maybe
Bye,
in 4D.
everybody.
4D maybe.
Yeah, maybe 4D. We'll see. See you in a couple weeks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.